This is Alif, she, her. I'm the Inclusion and Belonging Engagement Manager. I'm sure most of you know me. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our panel on queer narratives in games, and we are joined today by a lovely group of people, which I will now introduce. So this is our second kaleidoscopic topic for Iridian, our LGBTQ stream. Really excited today. This is shaped up to be really wonderful. We've got a really diverse, interesting collection of people. Collection, as if you're things. No, group of people. Okay, so I'll go through and introduce people. First, would you mind waving when I introduce? Is that okay, everyone? I'll yeah, okay, cool. So first off, we have Elliot Harriman, goes by she, her pronouns. She is a writer and narrative designer, most recently for Abandoned Sheep and winner of Gold and Silver Awards at Melbourne Queer Games Festival. Elliot has written many other queer characters, including in her own game Cover Me in Leaves, and other game Winter, which she co-wrote and programmed with Freya Campbell. We then have Ara Collins, goes by they, them. They are the writer and narrative designer at Supermassive and 2019 GDC scholar. Ara worked on a narrative for the queer relationship in the Dark Pictures anthology, The Devil and Me. Then we have Hassan Durant, goes by he, him pronouns, writer and narrative designer. Hassan's written queer characters for Wargame 2, has speaking history at PAX, Games SoundCon, DevCon, Call for Change panel, and more. Very accomplished. Then we have Devon Soik, goes by she, her. She's a senior narrative designer at Crytek, and began, as far as I understand, by writing queer romances for mobile apps. We then have Elizabeth Rose Astwood, goes by they, she, who is a producer at Queensguard Games. And finally, but certainly not least, is that how that sentence goes?
Last but not least.
Last but not least, there we are. And Lindsay goes by they, them pronouns and is a freelance writer and wrote I Was a Teenage Extra-Colonist, which I'm very excited about. Anyone who's spoken to me in the last 5 days knows that I've developed, no, not last 5 days, probably 3 weeks, knows that I've developed an obsession and can't stop playing. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us, especially to our panelists who are coming in from abroad and are coming at ungodly times of the morning. I think Elliot and Lindsay, Devon, I don't know, did you say Frankfurt? So not too bad.
An hour.
Okay, that's all right. But Lindsay and Elliot, I can only apologise and thank you so much. I think Lindsay's here at 5 in, which
That's
is
correct.
Wrong on so many levels. Thank you so much. So, okay, what we'll do is I've got a couple of questions prepared, which all of our panelists have seen in advance. And what I'll do is I'll read out the question and then go around sort of in the order that's on my screen. So we'll be starting with you, Ara, if that's okay. And then just so everyone knows, as usual, depending on our panelists' consent, of course, this will go live on Dojo afterwards and will be possibly shared externally, again, depending on everyone's confirmation that they're happy with the footage. So yes. Okay, let's start. So Ara and then onwards, if you could tell us a little bit about your journey into games and especially queer gaming, what's moved you to write about our community, this community, and what's your sort of general approach to it? Quite a lot of questions into one, so please feel free to share just a little bit just answer one of those bits if that's more comfortable.
No worries. So I did a narrative design degree at the University of Falmouth, and I was very lucky. I managed to get a AAA job at Supermassive as a implementation designer to start with in 2019, and then I moved laterally to become a narrative designer on the Dark Pictures and other things that are not yet released. And what makes me want to write or make stories about this community is I am part of this community. I think there's always more queer stories that can be told. And my approach to it is something I really want to pioneer at my company is the use of diversity consultants, because there are multiple people on the narrative team. Some of us are queer, which is great, and we're all like very inclusive and very welcoming, but there's no way that we can possibly cover all perspectives on the planet. And it would be weird of us if we didn't. And it'd be, we have to pay due diligence. And yeah, I really want to work with diverse writers and diversity consultants. And I can't say too much because of NDAs, but we're really pushing the diversity in our next games, which is really, really exciting, I think. So yeah,
that is exciting. Okay, fab. So thank you so much. I think we're also starting to work with diversity consultants soon, which, yeah, really exciting. As you say, there's no way to cover everything if you only have your own perspective as you come into writing a game. There's just no way. So that's awesome. Devon, are you happy to go next? Tell us a little bit about your journey into games and your approach to writing queer narratives.
Yeah, so I have worked in mobile, indie, and AAA now, and I've had a really unique and very cool experience where the majority of studios and teams that I've worked with have been majority queer. So when I first began, I wrote for an app called Love Struck, and it was a mobile romance story app it had the first, to our knowledge, it's the first mainstream app that included queer stories, and it's certainly, thanks to the efforts of one of my colleagues, Ivory, it's the first app that ever had a non-binary love interest available on the App Store and on Google Play. And so just being surrounded with these incredible writers that I would say walked so we could run, but it was more like they ran and we're walking behind them and they're running faster. They're also brilliant. And getting that experience in romance writing very early on, I think, has really made me passionate about telling queer stories because, of course, sexual orientation and romance, they're so intertwined. What stories are allowed to tell, which, in a meta sense, which receive pushback and therefore perhaps should be told a little louder and more often, has really influenced me in the kinds of characters I like to make and stories I like to write. I want to see myself and especially my friends there.
That's lovely. Thank you. I want to see myself in there too, and it's people like you that mean that I can. So that's awesome. Also, that you were one of the very first is such a cool thing to be able to say. Wow. Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind going next and telling us a little bit about your journey in writing about queer narratives.
Absolutely. And I did remember to unmute myself first. Hooray! So I did not have a background in writing or narrative design. I actually got a background. I have a geography degree, actually. And I went into office work, and then I had a child. And while I was on parental leave, I was like, hey, I'm actually going to give a shot being a full-time creative. And I did that. And I came up through comics, actually, first. I started in webcomics. I do an autobiographical comic called How Baby, which is about sort of like queer motherhood and mental health and pop culture and the expectations that we put on parents of all kinds. And then from that, I went to working on a webcomic called Mother Lover, which is about two moms who fall in love with each other as sort of like the school pickup drop-off line. And while I was doing that, I was contacted by Sarah Northway of Northway Games, who developed I Was a Teenage Exocolonist. And she was looking for an artist. And, that was something that I could do. I did some of the creature art. And then through that, she needed someone to work on the writing. And I got into game writing that way. So I started writing. I started my games journey in 2018. And then I started writing in 2020. Really good time to just be at home working on a video game, just getting real deep in the sauce, working on a game. I cut my teeth on fandom primarily. I've been creating and consuming basically like fan content since I was 12, which has been like a really formative part of my life, both personally and professionally. And, webcomics and fandom are very queer spaces. And so it just is kind of like natural to me to tell these stories and to write about these communities, because it's just where it's my bread and butter. It's where I am. It's where I live. And I've really been grateful for the chance to be able to get that into games too.
It's lovely that you've mentioned fanfic, because I think it's probably the case for lots of us, and maybe we should just say that more openly. I know that most of my like forays into writing have been Avatar: The Last Airbender fanfics, which I can't believe I'm saying live.
No, that's fair. That's super fair. Mine was Final Fantasy VII. That was my entry into fandom. That was my sister. I'm actually doing a talk. This is good. I'm doing a talk at GDC this year called I Am Fandom and So Can You. And it's for independent and solo game developers who basically are looking at their fandoms and being like, I don't understand how you work. I don't understand transformative fandoms. Why are you so feral all the time? and just to sort of like help them understand and interact with their fandoms in healthy ways. So I'm looking forward to doing that at GDC this year.
That's really exciting. I think some of us from Sumo will be at GDC, so catch me there, Lindsay.
Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, just wanted to say to everyone quickly that I will, to the best of my ability, and you know, providing everyone's happy for me to be linking to the work that our lovely panelists are talking about today. Yeah, that's, I think, important. Elizabeth, if you could tell us a little bit about your journey into games and your approach to queer narrative writing.
Yes, hello, thank you for having me. As you said, I'm Elizabeth, my pronouns are they, she, and I began as a playwright. So I went to school at the University of British Columbia for creative writing, was writing and directing for theater, and I started a nonprofit in Vancouver called the Purple Stapler Arts Society, which was to support marginalized developers of multidisciplinary backgrounds in a city where space is very expensive and it's hard to create platforms where we can actually show our work. So I actually kind of stumbled into games after that. I happened upon a writing contract for mobile games for romance as well. And it was kind of like a light bulb went off in my head that this was a whole nother industry that I hadn't participated in before, and I thought it was really exciting. And I really liked the potential reach of creating digital interactive fiction and other works. After that, I joined a studio, really excited, very naive, and didn't necessarily have the right fit there. I felt not necessarily respected for my gender identity, and felt that I had to be explaining myself a lot, and totally burnt out. So after that, I took a break and I started my own studio called Studio Lazulite, which is narrative focused. We're also working on our own first IP. And I have finally found a full team with Queensguard, we're all diverse queer people. We're working on another game called Shards Between Us. So you mentioned I'm the producer for Queensguard right now. And that's just been a fantastic experience. I feel welcomed, and it's just night and day, honestly. It's a completely fantastic experience, and I'm here to stay.
Oh, that's really lovely. Wow, you really took us on a narrative story just then. I can tell I'm talking to writers, because you really have just taken us on a little journey. That's really lovely. That's really, really encouraging and hopeful to hear that you had a not so great experience, but now people around you have turned a corner and are now welcoming you the way you deserve to be welcomed. That's fantastic. I was just wondering how you found the kind of the huge shift from being a playwright into moving into kind of mobile narrative games. How was that? I suppose that's I'm putting a question on you that I hadn't warned you about, so please feel free to say I have no thoughts and I can come back round. But yeah, just struck me as interesting.
Well, obviously the medium is very different. I think it being branching narrative, having multiple endings and things is different than traditional playwriting, but I was also involved with a lot of interactive theater, creating dinner theater and pieces where the audience is a piece of that story. So I think I was able to bring a lot of that into this medium as well.
Oh, that's a really good bridge. Yeah, immersive theatre, interactive theatre. Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you, Elizabeth. Sorry for springing a question on you there, just my own interests. Elliot, if you're okay to tell us a little bit about your journey into games and your approach to writing queer narratives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my journey's actually been quite similar to Elizabeth. I think I personally started out, I knew I wanted to write. I knew it was what I was good at, and I was messing around a bit with short stories, messing around with like screenplay stuff. I actually had a mentorship with Colin Trevathan right before like everything just kind of went to hell. And so I was stuck inside, and I was like, I cannot for the life of me get anyone to read what I'm writing. Because I knew how to program too. I just started making stuff in Twine and then ink when I realized how good ink is. And I just started collaborating with people. I found a great community, Game Dev Galaxy, that's kind of brimming with queer people. Found some really amazing collaborators there, and we just started kind of making stuff. And it somehow got like recognized and noticed. And I got hired to like make a little tiny micro indie game that was very queer. And then I got hired to write a slightly bigger indie game that was a little bit less queer. And then I started getting hired to work on like big AAA stuff, which was fantastic. And I have signed, you know, many documents that I had a great time working for them. They were absolutely very diverse and fantastic. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now, bouncing around. I've worked for some very queer studios, and I've worked for some very
maybe.
No, I mean, I think well, definitely yes, but I've also had the bad luck of working with some studios that are on their face very, you know, inclusive and accepting, and unfortunately, when push comes to shove, suddenly the CEO doesn't like you and starts sending you threatening emails at midnight. You know, that sort of like environment. And I think it's insane. This is a terrible industry on so many levels. I love working in it, but you know, this is a not a normal place to work, I think, compared to average workplace conditions. And especially when it comes to queerness, I think I've just had to start like, I found I need to keep coming back to my roots of, you know, creating my own stuff that's very raw and authentic, like putting a lot of myself into it, refusing to sand down the edges, because that's the only way I can kind of stay sane while working in these environments. I think, I mean, my approach to writing queerness in my own work, like I said, I don't want to create something that is solely wholesome and like comfortable. I do want to create that environment for people, but I also want to create stories that are really genuinely authentic. And sometimes that means depicting adversity, depicting like a lot of adversity, not for the sake of like things being hard and hurting, but just because that is sometimes how my life inherently is, you know? I have to take hormones for the rest of my life, and that sucks. Like, it's fine, and it sucks, and that's like, it's just like a little bit of texture that gets added to your life. And I think stories are most interesting when they have that sort of texture, if that makes sense. And yeah, so that's my personal work, and then in my more corporate stuff, the way I write queerness is just as much as I can put in before people start like, actually, maybe don't say that word. I will sneak things in when I have to, and I will shave the edges down when I absolutely have to too. But I think that's how I tend to approach it. Yeah.
Thank you for that really raw answer. That's so true, and putting yourself into it is not. Well, I think we all know this anyway. I'm not a writer, but well, I've written fanfic, as I've said, so I guess kind of. I'm going to say that I am. I've written a lot of fanfic. I've written volumes of stuff. So actually, no, I just yeah, obviously. I mean, the way the world interacts with our queerness, or the way that we experience our queerness, is hardly ever adversity free. So naturally, those things, I think, in some spaces, maybe those things can be removed, and that's lovely and wholesome, and it's nice for us to take a break and pretend, which is lovely. I mean, those spaces are needed, but in the same way, we need the grittiness, and we need the texture, and we need the realism.
Yeah, I think so. And I think part of why I think it matters to me, at least, is like, I think it's really important for queer people to, at least on some level, understand the history of like who we are as a people, because it's not like we have a culture, but it's not like we have it passed down by our parents and grandparents. You know, it's something that each generation needs to find for themselves. And the end result of that is, you know, sometimes you will stumble across someone on TikTok or Tumblr saying, actually, I don't think you should be calling yourself queer. That's like a slur. And you have to be like, okay, well, here's where that word actually started. Here's why we have queer studies on buildings. And like, I understand why it might seem like a hurtful word, and I understand why you have this inclination to not hurt anyone, but this is who we are. This is our history. And like, this isn't a word that comes from a hateful place. And I think if everything has its edges sanded down, sorry to overuse the metaphor, but like, I think you really start to lose that history, that texture, that sense of community. So I'm very passionate about using slurs in my work. Yes, absolutely. That's where I'm at.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to keep chatting about this. So I'll come back to you later, Elliot, and be like, but Hassan, I'm really eager to hear your answer as well. Have you frozen? No, I don't think so. If you could tell us a little bit about your journey, you're just really still. If you could tell us a little bit about your journey into games and your approach to writing about queerness.
Yeah. So my pathway into games is a little bit weird. I have a chemistry degree. It is in the trash can somewhere. But I guess I really started my foray into games through the audio space, which is also just like a bunch of degenerate queers hanging out and making good music. It's also just a very welcoming space. I found, like, even before knowing that a lot of the people that I was hanging around were queer, just the audio space was just a really welcoming environment, and I really appreciated that. And I've always been a writer. It wasn't until like high school that I kind of figured that games was like a thing that you could do. And so as I was like pursuing chemistry for some ungodly reason, I was also like scoping out the games industry for things to do with writing and audio. And in 2020, like right after everything went to hell, was when I really started doing narrative work in games, starting with my work for Wargroove 2. And I was very fortunate to have that is like my first experience because of the support that I got from the team unexpectedly. I remember when I was proposing parts of the story that I was writing, and at one point I kind of just shoved into the presentation just like, what if there were also gay kids? And then just for people to be like, yeah, sure, next slide. And that that's the part that went. That was just really amazing to have gone through. And then near the end of the experience, during the localization process, we unfortunately got pushback from the people who were doing the Russian translation of the game, and not specifically from the translators, just from like, hey, the law's here. I don't know if this is going to be possible. But the team also supported me through that. I went in like expecting to have to like maybe change things for certain areas, but the team supported me, and like I didn't end up having to do that. And so I was really fortunate that that was my first experience writing queer narratives for a broader audience. So yeah.
Wow, honestly, I'm surprised that you were and delighted to hear that you were able to, not have to change or censor, or, as Elliot has said, sand down a lot. I imagine they probably were asking of you to do so. That's awesome. Wow, so fantastic to hear that you got the support you needed then to stand firm in the work that you wanted to give to Russian audiences who have every right to experience queer narratives in whatever way they that we do. Yeah, absolutely. That's really lovely to hear. Fabulous. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm trying not to reply too much, but I get too interested. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay. The second question is an interesting one. I wasn't quite sure how to phrase it, but what I've obviously said to you is, how do you avoid the queerness in your story being an over-defining characteristic, or do you not avoid that and actually allow it to be over-defining, and why shouldn't it be? I think is kind of maybe what I should have also said. Maybe over-defining as queer is fantastic. I know I certainly did when I turned 18. I was like, all I am is gay. And still to this day, when people ask about my gender, I just say, I'm a lesbian. I don't have anything else to say to that question. So who knows? I think, along that line, so defining it or allowing it to define your characters. On the other hand, how would you recommend integrating it in a natural way, or a way that feels like it makes sense without, again, overly defining? But again, this might not be the case. Do you do it consciously, or do you feel you're simply writing your own experiences? I imagine most of us feel like we're writing our own experiences, but Elliot, do you mind if we do you want me to go first, or do you mind if we
Oh
do
no,
the usual?
I just wanted to ask, like, because this question shifted a little bit, I just kind of wanted to check, like, is part of what you're asking here, like, how to, for example, how would you create a very, like, messy, intimate queer story that is very, like, unique to the queer experience? How would you put that in, like, a AAA game? Is that kind of what you're getting at? Like, how do you not necessarily filter that for a general audience, but, like, how do you approach that? Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, in part as well. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. I wasn't quite sure how to phrase that, but yes, in some ways, it's how do you approach the sanding down if you need to, and also on a personal level, how you feel about having characters that are really, really queer, and whether or not you avoid that as being an over-defining characteristic. Ara, is that okay for you to answer? Or have I really muddled up the question now in such a
I think it's a super interesting question. And Elliot, you actually reminded me of a story that's related to this, where I was in a meeting with a bunch of directors, performance directors, and we were discussing a female protagonist and what hobbies she has. And somebody said, what if she was a vegetarian? And one of the guys went, oh, but then she'd have like a crusade. Like, she'd be too complicated. And I was sitting there like, queer, polyamorous, trans person being like, yes, far too complex. She's vegetarian, it just tips the scales. And it was just like me trying not to laugh in that meeting, because they were like, yeah, no, she's not vegetarian. She already like wears a beanie. It's like a whole thing. And just nodding very politely, but just internally having sort of a meltdown.
I'm so sorry. I can't get over the idea of someone being vegetarian as a hobby. Like, I'd be vegetarian.
It was like, how do we add color to her character? And there were lots of really good ideas in that. I'm not trying to say like, oh, it was like a bunch of really stupid ideas, but it was like, I think it might be me or somebody else was like, oh, she'd be vegetarian. They're like, no, it gives her a crusade, which is very funny to me, because I've never met a single vegetarian in my life who was like about it. But as for the how do you represent queerness without being defined characteristic or overdefined, is I think something that I realized after coming into AAA space, or just into games in general, is like, you're allowed to have more than one. You're allowed to have more than one queer person. But I think sometimes you go into these stories being like, I've got to take what I can get. Yeah. So I've got to like put it all into this one person. It's like, no, you're actually allowed to suggest that more than one person in this story is queer. And maybe, God forbid, in a different way. And so my approach in my job, and also of my colleagues, and we're all like on the same page about that kind of thing, or really welcoming, like, yeah, let's like suggest that character's a lesbian and this character's a boyfriend. Like, we're all really on board, which is great. But usually I just, at any opportunity ever, I'm like, what if autism? What if queer? What if disabled? And sometimes the director will go no, sometimes the director will be like, actually, yes, I think that's really interesting. But yeah, almost, I don't want to say being a pain in the ass about it, because I'm not obtuse, but at any opportunity I have, I think, because I think in AAA, as you were saying, Elliot, like stuff like this can get sanded down. So the more you suggest it, the more you're putting it in people's minds, I think. Yeah, that would be my general answer to that question, I think.
Lovely. I don't know if people have seen, it's a Disney film that came out a couple of years ago, I think it's called Strange New World. And I was having a conversation with an acquaintance, and she was saying, I just think they overdid it with this character. You know, he's gay, he's mixed race, he's got a dog that doesn't have a leg. And I was like, I'm gay, mixed race, and my cat doesn't have a leg. So, and she was like, oh my God, I'd never thought about it like that. And I was like, we're not just a list of things on top of things. This is a meshing of I think it was kind of like a mind-blowing light bulb moment for her, which I thought was just hilarious. It just reminded me when you said you can be more than one thing, it's like, yes, here we are. We exist, same as you. We're just going about going to Sainsbury's and going to Tesco's and doing the normal thing, same as you are. So it's just funny. Devon, sorry, went over a little bit there, but yeah, Devon, what's your approach to this issue?
My guiding principle is ask for forgiveness, not permission.
Nice.
I pitch it the way it is, right? The character springs fully formed like Athena from the head of Zeus or whatever, and I present it, and I'm like, this is the character. And if they're non-binary, I use the pronouns sets or whatever, and just I found that if you are confident about how fleshed out this character is as a person, if you present with confidence, a lot of the times that helps people get on board in that way where they make the connection, like, oh yeah, real people like this exist, not always effective, and there's always pushback. And I try to pushing buttons is not a good word, but like I want a good answer. And so if I have to sand something down, I expect you to be able to call me and look me in the eye and tell me why. And I might not agree with your reasons. And sometimes I've worked with clients in the past who like also didn't agree with those reasons, but didn't have a choice, but it's at least having the conversation, I think, pushes the needle in an off the screen way. But yeah, I mean, it is unfortunately a fact of life that you have to sand things down, and not just for queerness, but for all kinds of things to like reach a wider audience and make more money and be more palatable and whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Lindsay, what's your general approach to this issue that I've confused? Sorry.
It's been so interesting hearing from all of you. I work almost entirely in the indie sphere, and I've been so fortunate to have never received a lot of pushback because I've mostly been making in queer spaces. So you're all very strong, and thank you for sharing your stories. For me, I think that when I approach character creation, I feel like when you approach character creation as something that you're sort of like doing by committee or you're doing by diversity checklist, which is kind of a meme in these spaces. When you have people being like, well, we just need to have a gay character or we need to have a strong female character because we just need one because people will get mad at us if we don't. That's where you get this like very fake, overdefined. I think that's what people are seeing when they're seeing overdefined. It's not about having one note. You're seeing a creative process that is not real, and you're bound to get the audience to sense that as well. And I think partially that's because representation goes beyond just what's on screen or what's on the page, and it's what's behind it and what goes into making it. On one extreme of the spectrum, I believe you can write a queer story, a story that feels queer and resonates with queer readers or viewers without any queer characters in it at all that are visible and saying their identity to you. I mean, that's why we have Star Trek. Like, it's literally why we have Star Trek, because Star Trek was like this show that no one cared about until female fans who loved Kirk Spock were like, no, put that back on air. I want my boys to kiss. Like we literally wouldn't have Star Trek if we didn't have this like sense of like, that's a gay story. I can feel it in my bones.
So true.
And on the other hand, if you're writing a queer character, making them being queer kind of like the least interesting thing about them, surrounding them with other queer characters with different characteristics, so you don't fall into the trap of like trying to represent an entire sexuality with one person. And so you have the one gay character, and they can never die, and they can never do a crime, and they can never take off their clothes because they're the one gay character, and you can't do anything to them because then you're saying so much that you don't intend to say. So you just kind of make it like unremarkable. One of the best comments I get about Exocolonists is that the queer representation feels real, and that's because I tried to make it feel real. It goes deeper than simply having queer characters, but their identities feel kind of like natural and unremarkable in the context of their world, which is kind of like why Exocolonists kind of gets called like a cozy game, despite being very emotionally challenging, because it kind of holds this gentle, respectful space for the player and honors who they are and welcomes them in. And that's how you go beyond just having a queer character and having that representation into like making a queer space and making a queer story. So that's I try to come at it from that angle instead.
Wow, that was a really awesome answer. Also, be gay, do crime. 1, 2, huge Trekkie. I'm lighting up. I'm such a huge Trekkie. I wasn't watching the OG Star Trek, but catch me out here shipping all of the female Voyager characters together, Janeway / any female character, and I'm there. So love that. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Elizabeth, your feelings about this issue, or however you want to approach it. I've muddled up the question, so.
Yeah, well, first, I think there's already been some fantastic answers. So I think maybe part of what I say will kind of be building on that. Because for me, I think when I'm approaching my writing, it's really about the details and fleshing out that character. So it's not that I'm writing a queer character, I'm writing this person with a name, and this is their history and their background and all of their intersectional pieces of their life. And if it's integrated into a whole authentic person, then it's not going to feel forced. And I think the other piece of this, I'll speak maybe just briefly as a producer, is as someone who has had hiring responsibilities, it's also really, really important to make sure that we have diverse teams creating those people, whether that's hiring consultants or taking it even that step further and having someone full-time that's there in all of the design meetings to kind of bring up things that maybe hadn't been considered or push back against some of the problematic ideas that are floating around the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Elliot, your feelings, thoughts?
Hello. Yes. Hi. I mean, I think the way I approach this is like personally, I've never heard of anyone like accusing a rom-com of being too straight, you know? I've heard of people being like, hey, actually James Bond is like a little sleazy. It's a little like it hasn't aged too well. But the focus is never on the straightness, which is of course the default. I think, at least in our culture, pretty universally, straightness and cisgenderedness is the default. That's the case with a lot of marginalized demographics, but we talk about sex and gender and sexuality. So because of that, the minimum for a queer character is like, this female character has a girlfriend, and that's mentioned once in an email in a hidden computer you have to go find somewhere. That has to be like the minimum, because if you don't mention it, people are going to just assume she's straight. And even if that's all you mention, the fandom's going to tear itself apart debating if she's a lesbian or bisexual. Like this is, I saw the comments after Tracer came out. Like it was a whole thing. I do think there are some stories. I think there are some characters who are very queer in a way that general audiences are going to struggle to digest. I have a couple of these books on my desk. I don't know if anyone can recognize them, but if you do, you probably need therapy. And I, something like that, I don't think would be ideal for something that's going straight to Game Pass or whatever. I think if I was pulled in to write a AAA game, I wouldn't try to shoehorn an inherently queer experience into that, because that's not really going to fit in the same way that like a diatribe about plumbing probably isn't appropriate for the latest Ubisoft title. But because that gap exists, because the minimum for a queer character is higher than a not queer character, I do try to insert a lot of that myself, and I try to make it more than just like a stray mention. If that's all I can get away with, then I'll gladly do it. But personally, I try to at least make it a little bit more integrated into the character. And I try to do it in a way that doesn't feel like it's just, checking boxes on a list, which is a hard thing to do. It's a tight wire act. But I find just making it a little authentic and maybe not having character explicitly say like, oh, I'm trans, but like even just showing like the needle and estrogen like in their bathroom cabinet, something like that. It's like that feels better to me than anyway, that's how I tend to think about all this.
I love that. I think it's that thing of having a checklist, like Lindsay was saying, where it feels forced. And that might be what we as queer people were defined as being over-defined, because it's done in such a way that doesn't feel creatively natural. Instead, you're just like, right, I'm going to pick 3 random diverse things and just attach them on top of a character that already exists, which doesn't feel real.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have queer people on your team. And I think, kind of by extension, and this is a little unrelated, sorry, but I think it's one of the reasons why it's so important to have queer people in your company for long enough for them to get promoted and actually be put in positions of power. Because when they're not, when you hire a bunch of queer people, but it's still, and again, every marginalized demographic, but when it's default RPG settings, straight white cis man, like that's when you get that's when you start to see issues emerging. I found in the past. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. Hassan, what are your thoughts and feelings around this very now complicated question? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, it is an interesting and complicated question. I, like many people here, I often take the approach of just sprinkling a little queerness in a lot of different places. And I think that really helps. And especially if you can like let go of maybe thinking that every person who plays this game will know that this character is queer. I think that frees you up to do a lot of interesting things that like maybe a bunch of people will pick up on, maybe they won't. But if you don't have to like have this one thing that says to the camera, this is a lesbian, then like you can do a lot more with that. I also think that it's interesting, like if we're talking about making a game with like mass appeal for a wide audience, and we're thinking about the audience who maybe is uncomfortable with queer subjects. Those queer subjects are like a psychological trigger for these people. And like not all of them are like hateful bigots or that sort of thing. And if you want to introduce queer subjects into games for those people to also digest, you can sort of treat it as a sort of psychological trigger, like people need to feel safe in order to engage with it. So like the more that you can do to like help people feel safe in that space can really help. Like having characters where like maybe the queerness isn't introduced like immediately and you ramp up to it, or you use humor to like soften the blow of a queer person existing.
Of a gay person.
It sucks to say, but like it is true for a lot of people. But I will say that for some people, as a game developer, you aren't going to be able to provide the safety that they need. Case in point, with Wargroove 2, there is a non-binary main character who had been referred to using they them pronouns for like the entire game. I was watching a stream of a streamer playing the game, and they got to like one point where like somebody used they them like maybe twice in a sentence, and like they suddenly realized that this character that they had like seen for like 8 hours at this point was non-binary, and they like were visibly upset about it. And like it sucked, but I also realized that like there was nothing that I was going to be able to do to like make that person feel okay with like a non-binary person existing. And I just
is that your responsibility? That's their responsibility to manage their, no, that doesn't fall on any of us really, does it? Yeah, it's that interesting thing about different things for different spaces, and how willing we are to make people feel comfortable, because I imagine some of us are like, screw that, I don't want to make you feel comfortable. But if you do that, and that makes you feel good and fulfilled, and I think that's amazing. I think if I was writing, I would like want to make people feel uncomfortable. It would sort of be, as soon as you start, this is going to be gay. So if you don't like it, just go away. But it's like, as you say, it's different things for different spaces, and that wouldn't work in some spaces and it would work in others. And it's how far we're willing to go. I'm saying we as a queer person, not as a writer, because I'm not a writer.
Fan fiction.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, next question. I think what I'll do is, because we only have 10 minutes left, I will skip the third question, and maybe we can discuss that at a later date, and just move on to the fourth, to talk about who or what has inspired you throughout your career in games, both negatively and positively. Things that you might have seen and thought, I know that I don't want to do that, and things you've seen, I would like to do or build on that. If you're willing to talk about things, being safe and NDA conscious and all that sort of thing. But yes, work that has inspired you both negatively and positively, and mentors or work that you might want to shout out. Ara, if you're happy to start.
Yes, so I was very lucky as part of my scholarship to be mentored by David Gader, who was the narrative director on the Dragon Age franchise.
Wow.
I got to meet him. It was really sick. And Dragon Age was the first game where I was like, gays can be in a video game.
Same here.
Gay people can be in video games. I did not know this was a concept to my young mind. That / Mass Effect. And I really wish I'd made more of a deal about how much of a fan I was, because we sat down to eat Mexican food and he's like, oh, there's this character called Dorian you may have heard of. And I was like repressing the urge to like scream. But it turns out that whole character arc of his dad is basically trying to use conversion therapy on him using magic. A lot of that was inspired by his own like experiences growing up. I don't know with conversion therapy, but a lot of it came from him and his experiences, and absolutely love Dorian as a character. And so seeing that like really inspired me and thought like, I really want to write for games. This is incredible. Iron Ball as well. Just and all those queer characters in those games slap. I also remember playing Mass Effect and being just stupended that Jack was somehow straight. And then feeling vindicated when I found out later she was meant to be pansexual, and then they backed down on that at the last possible second. And I was like, that is not a straight woman. That is terrible that it happened. But yeah, seeing that and feeling how much enjoyment I got from that, and really wanting to like, I want to create those moments with somebody else. I want to create cool queer characters that everybody finds really fun and enjoyable. So yeah, that would be me.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really awesome. Devon, who or what has inspired you negatively and positively? Mentors or work that you might want to shout out?
How much time do we have?
Not long, I'm afraid, but I will be writing these things up. So come back to me afterwards. And
I'll give you a list. I've just had the fortune of working with so many talented writers who I admire so much. And I want to shout out, first of all, we have written an anthology together. It's called Long Summer Nights, and it's a queer monster romance story collection, and it's incredible. We even got an even mixture of like male, female, femme / non-binary pairings. Like it's all the demographics are pretty even based on what we naturally all wanted to write about. And every story in there is a banger. We've got Ivory from like Baldur's Gate 3 fame. We've got Arson Kidder there, who is another author I recommend. She has a Minotaur story called First She Must Catch You. I really admire Rianne Gray, who writes queer romances. Frances Maples is a great game designer. And she's in there as well. Sorry, I've got my list up. Eve Golden Woods has a piece in there as well. And she currently works at Dreamfield. She wrote If Found, which won all kinds of awards. And that's like an incredible coming out story. I could go on for days, but please check out these writers.
Thank you so much, Devon. That's awesome. As I say, I'll ask for a list afterwards, and then in the kind of write up, I'll make this available. I've just noticed that we have 2 Elliots on screen. I think one is frozen and one isn't. I'm not sure if IT can remove the frozen Elliot, but if not, then we have a beautiful still.
I'm so sorry.
In the corner.
Closed the wrong window. I did not know what I was thinking.
That is fine. Not to worry. That's fine. I just thought I'd address it instead of avoiding eye contact.
Not my best angle.
This.
I'm a little mad. If this had been like nicely posed, I wouldn't have minded so much. But
she's gone.
Thank you so much.
Lindsay, if you want to talk about work that has positively and negatively inspired you and mentors.
I put so much more brain power into the third question than the fourth question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You've hooped me.
If you want, I could ask you that one instead.
Oh, no, it's okay. We'll save it for later. In the interest of time, I will take the fall on this one. I have never met a person in my life. I've never read a book. I've never watched a movie. My biggest inspiration has been the real girlies in the 90s and early aughts who taught me everything there is to know about love and relationships through the magic of fanfics. So that's who I'm shouting out. And I'll take the fall for the rest of the 5 minutes left we have in this meeting. Someone else go. Say the good one.
I would have been very happy if you'd sent across fanfic usernames. That's all I'll say. I was very happy with that. Thank you. Elizabeth.
One game I've been playing recently is Soul State by Tanya Khan, which is a sci-fi visual novel about queer characters. And it's sort of set in this world where you're fighting against the government and oppression, and there's a lot of different intersectional themes going on in there, which is just a joy to experience and see myself reflected on screen and others as well. I also just listened to the Corner of Story and Game podcast has they just released on February 11th a diversity and inclusion storytelling talk with some fantastic writers as well. And then I guess I'll also say that personally I'm very inspired by my team at Queensguard right now. We just showed our first demo at the Rome Games Lab and post our wish list, our Steam wish list page, and kind of getting that going. So if anyone wants to check it out, we would really love that.
I will ask you to send me these bits afterwards and in emails, I think, and that's how we'll do it, because I'm like, I want to write this down, especially that game you just mentioned. I'm like, so yeah, what I'll do is if everyone's okay with that, I'll ask you to send bits over. It's flipped on my screen, so it's Hassan next this time.
Cool. Yeah, so in terms of like inspiration, a bit of recent inspiration, I worked on the audio for a game called King of the Castle by Tributary Games. Wait, Elliot, did you do any writing on that?
You're muted, Elliot.
Hi, yes, sorry, I was one of the contractors on that. That's so cool.
Oh, amazing. No, yeah. So that's an amazing game. A lot of queer storylines in the game. I recommend everybody play it with a group of friends. I'm also inspired by like artists such as Nadir Noor, who's a queer artist in, I cannot remember which country. I've never seen a map before. I can't read. And Trung Nguyen, or Trungles, who wrote a amazing graphic novel called The Magic Fish. Composers like Ivy Tran, who worked on the Steven Universe soundtrack. Josie Breckner, who is a dear friend and a game composer who is working on the next Necrodancer title. I don't know what I was doing there, but yeah, all of these people are fantastic, and I recommend checking out their work.
Amazing. Thank you so much. What an excellent list. I also enjoy that Hassan's never seen a map and Lindsay's never met anyone or read any books or done anything. Thank you, Hassan. Elliot, finally, I'm so sorry, I've only got 2 minutes left, but we can
you're totally fine. No, I'll go quick. Yeah, I mean, listen, you can Google like favorite queer games Reddit. You can Google favorite games Reddit. There's going to be a whole list, but I think like all of the stuff I would recommend is just on itch.io. Just go on there, just start looking for weird shit.
True.
They do a great job curating the homepage, but also just go looking. Domino Club is doing some amazing work. Some really fucking strange stuff is coming out of there. And all of those creators are incredible. Communist Sister, Hexray, AVB, Liz England has a really cool game called Growth that I have saved here. Gem and Topaz, Cecile Richard, Ivan Pabiol, Olive Brainwash Gang. And Gadget Patch is incredible. So yeah, just if you can rewind and go through that list. And if not, then just check out itch.io. Just go looking for the weird shit, because it's out there and it's fantastic. And it's like, it's the sort of stuff that you get before it's filtered into, AAA queer narratives. And that's what I would study, and that's what I would create if you ever want to kind of explore it yourself. That's where I would start.
Absolutely. I found so much weird, awesome, gay ass stuff on itch.io. And now I can't remember anything because it seems we all have blank mind syndrome. But if I remember, I will say. Okay. Oh, Lindsay, yes.
On that note, Elliot, you should play, if you haven't already, He Fucked the Girl Out of Me.
Oh yeah, I have. That's a really good one too. Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
That one's very, very good. Definitely on itch.io. It's very good, and it goes as hard as the title does.
I think I have like the most imagined rivalry ever with that, because I think one of my games was like very close to the top of like top-rated trans games on itch, and it knocked me out. So I'm a little bit. But it's completely deserved. Go check it out if you haven't already. It's a little intense. It's about half an hour long, but it's a really, really cool narrative experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of you. Not only for coming from abroad at, as I said, ungodly hours of the morning, but also just sharing in the way you have, really kind of raw, present. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. We have an open Q&A now. I don't know if we'll have any questions just because of the time of day. Yeah, it doesn't look like we have anything yet. And yeah, none yet, which is fine. It's open now if anyone wants to ask. Q&A is now open. Please put your questions in if you have any. In the meantime, yeah, I'm just going to say thank you again so much to all of you. This has been really fun as well. It's always a bit nerve-wracking to do these. I imagine as a panelist and also as a chair, it's like but this was really enjoyable. Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed it, and I imagine it's actually been quite fun to watch as well because we've had such varied perspectives, and you all have come from such different places and ended up in a similar space, which I think is awesome. It's also been so nice to have you like interact with each other and be like, oh, I know you from this, and oh, I recommend this. That's just really cool and really nice. So thank you for that. As I said to you, the last 30 minutes, if we do have any questions, which it doesn't seem we do at the moment, are optional. You don't have to stay if you don't have the time, or if you have prior commitments, that's absolutely fine. Where we've got the time though, I was thinking I could ask that final question if people are happy to stay and answer, especially for Lindsay's benefit, because I know that they had put in a lot of time and effort into that. So yeah, I'll do that, and then if we haven't got any questions by the end, or if we do, we'll manage it if that's okay. So yeah, what are your thoughts on writing characters that are canonically queer versus characters that are player sexual? So we're thinking Baldur's Gate 3, which lets you romance anyone and kind of the assumption that everyone is pansexual, whereas Cyberpunk doesn't, with the reasoning that certain characters have particular sexualities that are necessary to their character and story. We have just got a question, hilariously, just as I finished saying that. What am I going to do? I think what I'll do is I'll ask this question first, the question we've just received. Yeah, now we're getting questions in naturally, just as soon as I ask that. Okay, scratch that question.
Totally fine. It's a huge question. It's best saved for everyone to talk about later.
That's true. Yeah. We'll move it to another avenue at a different time. Okay, first question from Liberty. It's a bit personal, but how do you deal with the idea of being just a diversity hire? As it's something I struggle with a lot. Does anyone want to volunteer to answer, or should I go around? Yeah, Elliot, please. Yeah.
So I haven't ever explicitly been confirmed as a diversity hire, so I don't know if I'm the best person on this panel to really speak about it. But I've certainly been hired by people who are, on their face very like positive about queerness, and then like actually in reality that isn't something that's translating to their actions, their management style, the way they exist as a coworker. So maybe there's some overlap there. All I can really say is like even if you don't feel like you're there for the right reasons, I mean, God willing, you're not going to end up being the only queer person on the team. And I know that when I'm joining a team, if there's already someone who is there, who is queer, that makes me feel safer. I remember interviewing for a place here in Melbourne, and I walked through the office on the way to to the interview room, and I saw 55 people. I checked the number, and I counted 4 people who weren't a straight cis white man. And I knew from the outset, if I get hired here, if I accept this job, this is going to be an uphill environment. I will be the diversity hire. This is going to be a rough environment. So I think honestly, maybe this isn't the most reassuring answer, but just by virtue of existing, you are going to make more other queer people feel comfortable, and any new hires that's going to help them. And I think, again, I'm sorry if that answer doesn't help you specifically, but I at least find it a little comforting to think maybe that's going to help them down the line. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I think that is helpful. I feel the same. Walking into a space, I'm kind of like checking first, is this safe? Is this space safe? So yeah, I think that's probably the same for most of us. Question from an anonymous person. I was wondering what your thoughts are on non-queer writers handling queer narratives. If anyone wants to volunteer to answer. Aaron? Yes, please go ahead.
So I like the moxie, and I really, what I don't want is people shying away from diversity because they're like, I can't do that. It's a really interesting question because some people won't have necessarily the resources to hire like diversity consultants and all of that and like be able to pay people to come in. I think the effort is very important. Like I remember there's this game people might know, Coming Out on Top, visual novel, great visual novel. And it was actually written and created by a straight woman. But the reason that it passed the vibe check is that every other week, and it was an indie game, so she could do this in AAA, that'd be harder. She was sharing it on forums and getting like weekly feedback from the gays, being like, hey, is this good? Do you like this? Is this fun? Is there anything I need to include or not include? And I thought that was excellent. And then she got a product at the end that it felt very whole, and that she considered all the possible avenues and perspectives in that. I've also just forgotten the original question, even though I just finished that sentence.
Thoughts on non-queer writers writing queer characters, which you've answered really well.
Yeah, and that also is something that's come up in my own team as well, although I'm a queer part of the team as well. I came to this team and there were already like queer characters established in a game that was being worked on. And yes, that's something I was like, we got to get diversity consultants in here because we're all going to write it well. We're like really good writers, but nobody here is like a gay man, for instance. So that's a great way to avoid just stepping on the wrong foot, so to speak.
Yeah, agreed. If you're going to write about us, at least get some input. At the very least, don't do it in a silo. I think is yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else have an answer to that particular question? No. Another one. He missed the first 30 minutes, so apologies if this was answered previously. But a question about exocolonists, Lindsay. Did writing for a setting that broadly aspired to present a better or idealized version of societal principles changed how you approached writing LGBTQ narratives? Were there story beats you felt that could or couldn't be included in a society where these things were more normalized?
I think that's a really good question. And in the writing of the game, which took about 18 months, I was sort of like constantly being confronted by my own assumptions because I was writing a world I don't currently live in. And I kept coming up against things like, hey, these hippies don't believe in having their own biological children. What do they believe about the family structure? What do they believe about marriage? Would the main character describe their parents as married? And so I was constantly coming up against these things that made me sort of like even look at my own biases that, nominally I have a lot of experience with. I write comics about parenthood and motherhood. And even then I was still like, there's so much more to talk about here. I think that there were some things that we didn't get to simply because it didn't make sense for the world. For example, there's a trans character and she's transitioned since she was a child. So since she was, 6 years old. And there was no point of us being able to have a story beat in the story of being like, oh, by the way, main character, I'm trans. Like we didn't grow up together on this spaceship and have known each other for all the 13 years of our lives. And so I didn't get to write a coming out story, or because something was normalized, I didn't get to write overcoming adversity for your orientation, because that was just not something that was in the story. I personally enjoyed that experience because I was able to just like put those aside, like toys I didn't need or tools I didn't need. And I was able to think about other things. It's like, okay, so this trans character is fully realized as a trans woman. No one cares. And everyone knows that she's a woman. What else can she do? can she do a planetary genocide? Yeah, sure, do crimes. So like you can add stuff like that. So being able to put aside the things that I would interact with here, if I was telling a story on Earth, opened up so many more things that I could talk about and like get to within the scope of a game. So yeah.
A great answer. I loved it. I was like, it was like letting go of a breath and being like, this is so nice, sinking into a warm bath. Devon.
Yeah, I want to add also, we had a similar role in the Lovestruck app romances. It was kind of like queerness as the default, queerness totally normalized in this world, because we wanted to bring that element from genre romance of you should feel safe and loved in this world all the time. And there's, of course, a time and a place to tell, coming out stories or stories of overcoming the problems of being queer in real life. But this was like specifically escapist. And I think it was very freeing for a lot of us to not have to handle those topics and just dive right into whatever like juicy, and then her ex-girlfriend showed up. Like that was really nice.
Absolutely.
I have a best friend who's absolutely obsessed with Lovestruck. And they love it for that exact reason. They're just like, I just want drama, like juicy drama without the phobias and the bigotry. I just want drama. And like, well, yeah, that's perfect. Thank you both. Does anyone else have anything to offer to that? Yeah, Hassan, please. Yes.
Yeah. As you were talking, I realized that I sort of did a weird thing to kind of address it. It's not really a problem, like both of you said, like you managed the games fine doing that. But when I was writing in More Groove 2, this romance between these two queer teenagers, I wasn't writing a world where like that was necessarily a problem, but I did write a world where this specifically was a problem because one of the characters is like of a higher station. Also, one of the characters is just super shy and so nervous about like coming out, sort of, but only so far as like making his feelings known to the other person. So like you could read both of those things as like allegorical for a situation like in our world where coming out to somebody might be a problem because of your sexuality. So I guess what I'm saying is you could, if you wanted to, sort of sublimate some of these real world issues into a fantasy world where it's not really a problem by like making other things a problem that are similar.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think there's an episode of Star Trek, a couple of episodes of Star Trek that do things like that, where it's clear that they're trying to talk about gender, they're trying to talk about sexuality, but they want to present a world where we don't suffer from phobias and bigotry and what have you. So instead, it's like these two aliens they can't, for whatever reason, social or like even biological at some points, and that's how they did it. And it's effective and it works. I think it depends kind of if you want to feel like you're fully just like getting into a warm bath and being able to forget those things, then you might not want that. But in other ways, I think it's really useful to present a fantasy world where we don't have to think about those things, but you still get the story you're able to identify with, like overcoming or whatever. So it's striking a nice balance, I think. Yeah, as a reader, not as a writer. Does anyone else want to touch on that question? No? Okay. Next question. What would you recommend when trying to build up a writing portfolio? Putting out smaller pieces of work or work more in depth than one piece? Devon, please. Yeah.
I will jump on that one. Small pieces of work, small, polished, finished pieces of work, always better, because what separates a professional from a hobbyist who can do whatever they like, and that's a beautiful thing, a professional has to finish the job. They have to do it from beginning to end and maintain that focus, and they have to prove that they can handle that. And so even if it's just a tiny little thing, if it's finished, that's more than most people making a portfolio are going to have or do.
Thank you. Yeah. Elliot, yes.
Yeah, no, that is 100% correct. The only addendums I would add to that is if you have a bunch of stuff in your portfolio that's like polished but not maybe really working, find some people to collaborate with. Find an artist, find a musician, find someone who can do sound, and start making things that are a little more involved. But again, keep short if you can. if you want to use bigger things to like skill build, that's fantastic. You should do that. But I would recommend having a solid and like visually interesting portfolio first. Oh, there was one exception to this, and I've totally forgotten it. My brain has gone completely blank.
That's okay. We can come back around if you remember.
That's probably for the best.
Okay.
I would say a long-running thing that you're publishing in installments, that's fine to not be finished if you can show that it's, you know, being updated.
Oh, sorry, I remembered. It's you're gonna have to forgive me. It's 1 a.m.
Oh my God,
having something that can be easily presented in a PDF is unfortunately like surprisingly common. When people ask for writer's packets, they often expect things as PDFs. I do not have a good solution for taking a very branching conversation and putting it in a PDF. I haven't solved this. I have made entire interactive fiction game engines myself, and I still cannot figure out the humble PDF. But try to write with that in mind, and try to write with meaningful choices in mind too, showing how things branch and react and how you can sort of handle that as an author. Just keeping in mind the actual way that you submit things, because unfortunately, I have the stats for this for myself and a lot of other people. If you submit an itch.io link to your like profile page, most of the time the recruiter isn't going to go through and play your games. Like they just realistically aren't. So having a good, fast, clean way of presenting things, and the other thing too with itch is you want everything like playable online. Absolutely never, if it's part of your portfolio, it needs to be playable online, because if it's a downloadable thing, that's never going to get actually played by HR. Yeah.
That's really useful. Thank you, Elliot. I'm just going to go to Lindsay first, Hassan, but just because Lindsay had their hand up first.
Oh, Elliot covered everything. It's all good.
Oh, okay, amazing. Amazing. Wow. Hassan, please. Yes.
Yeah, no, I just had a quick thing to add, and like I don't know if this worked, because I don't know about like the hiring process, how well this has worked on my portfolio, but like for the issue of like not being able to put a huge branching conversation into a PDF, one thing that I did early on was I had like a Twine game in my portfolio, but in like a PDF, I went through like an overview of the branching decisions and explained like my design rationale for them. And so I had like a flowchart sort of thing in a PDF that was like a summary of the game, and then had a link. If you have 10 minutes, please play this.
I want to see
could
that.
work. Oh, it's a very old thing. I don't know if I like it anymore, but I can send it to you for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. That's so useful. I think we've got another question, or I think maybe comment, which is very lovely. It reads, "Thank you all for your time and your emotional vulnerability in bringing your energy to the games you create and share with the world. A special personal shout out from me for I Was a Teenage Exocolonist, which has rocketed into my top 10 games that have helped me on many levels. A question. How do you feel about the LGBTQ plus support from larger studios, so AAA studios? I suppose that looking back over the last 20 years of the industry, there's been huge progress. Do you feel that there is a genuine change happening and continue to happen, or is that perhaps just a bit of pink washing?" Elliot, and then Ara.
Yeah, sorry to jump in on every single question. I have a lot of opinions. I think there has been a huge amount of genuine change. I think things have gotten absolutely better, and I think they're continuing to get better. I think they're getting better a lot faster now that queer people are part of these studios, moving into management. I think the unfortunate thing to remember is like queerness isn't a simple binary, like cishet or queer. It's a very, very multidimensional thing, and there are so many other things going on too, so many other marginalized genders and characteristics that can sort of factor in. And my personal experience has been that while my queerness is often celebrated publicly, it can lead to problems privately. People who are very openly supportive are very supportive up until a point, and that point can be as simple as like, I have just disagreed with you in a meeting, and now you are getting like really hostile with me in the DMs. I've dealt with people who were either like really transphobic and hated me specifically, or actually they were really progressive, and they were just misogynist. They treated me like a woman, but they didn't treat me well, and you will come across people like this. You will come across people like this, unfortunately, and it's fucking hard. It's brutal. It's heartbreaking. All I can really say is, yes, I think things are getting better, and the only way to make sure that they keep getting better is promoting diverse voices, supporting them, supporting each other. I think, I don't know if anyone's paying attention to all of the kerfuffle on Tumblr yesterday, but like now more than ever, like I think we need to support each other, and we need to give each other the benefit of the doubt. Have a little more patience for the queer people in your life, because the way that they are treated by the people around them, it tends to be rough, and it tends to be a little bit inaccurate and hyperbolic sometimes. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I think things have absolutely gotten better, and I'm really cautious about ever talking about the industry in a way that will scare other queer people off.
Yeah.
Certainly conditions this year it's very hard to find work compared to last year, and I would maybe not recommend anyone enter the industry right now, but I do think really, really important to celebrate the progress we've made, and really important to keep pushing and supporting each other, not just the companies for doing this, but also the individuals behind it. And as a last note, and again, I'm so sorry, but I think it's really important to celebrate and like praise the companies for doing even the dumbest pinkwashing, because no, I don't think I mean that. Actually, I might take that back a little bit. But the last thing we want is like to meet positive anything with that sort of hostility that makes them pull back. We've seen a couple of companies do that, and it sucks. It's heartbreaking. We don't want to like lose that progress. If there are issues, confront them, deal with them, absolutely. But at the same time, like try to encourage that progress where it happens, I guess is my take.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Elliot. Absolutely. Ara, I think you had your hand up before, Devon. Yes.
So my experiences, I've only ever worked at one company, supermassive, so this definitely does not represent AAA, as Elliot was saying. There's a variety of responses. I personally have come a long way in my own company. This sort of leads to the very first question that was asked as well. I remember like my first couple of months, supermassive, like nearly 5 years ago, I told somebody I had they them pronouns, and they looked at me like I was an alien. And I don't think they meant it in a bad way. They were just so thrown. And in my head, I was like, I am never mentioning I have pronouns ever again. But thankfully that has changed, and there's been a lot of cool stuff my company has done, but I think honestly the most meaningful stuff to me has been us in teams starting our own like queer community chats, neurodivergent chats, and surprised that nearly 10% of the company is queer and neurodivergent. And that has been meaningful to us because we're able to, like, somebody will ask a question about something and we're able to sort of mentor and help each other. That has been really special and important to me, is that sort of community rallying around itself within the company. I remember somebody joined and they said, oh yeah, my name is this, but my name is actually Sasha. Can I have that changed, even though that's not legally binding? And we were like, yes, sure, you can. Here's who you go to. Supermassive has been pretty good about that kind of stuff, about people wanting to get their names changed, even if it's not legally binding, or like teams on picture, the team's pictures or the pronouns. But I think, as Elliot said, I think the most important thing is seeing queer people and diverse people in positions of management. So actually getting to see Freya and Poppy, people who we know, as like team leads and senior designers has been really great. And we're like, fantastic, brilliant. We hope this trend continues. I would love to see some really diverse game directors one day, because they are so important in deciding what the culture is like.
So true. Yeah, absolutely. Just to pick up on what you said about community, what we're doing right now is serving the community here at Sumo Group. It's exactly what we're doing. So yeah, thank you so much. PRISM is our, as I said, our ERG, and right now we're creating and talking and chatting and supporting our LGBTQ community in PRISM. So I'm really grateful, and just want to emphasize that that's exactly what we're doing right now for our company. So thank you.
And thank you for having the platform for all of us as well. I'm very grateful. So thank you.
Devon, yes.
Yeah. Seconding, honestly, I think there's been so much progress and so much more, things are so much more welcoming now than they were even 5 years ago. And I do, I guess, want to and have to make the disclaimer that everything I've said today, none of it reflects my current employment, and I'm discussing specifically like the queer focused games I've worked on in the past. But my experience is that even for those games where the point was to have a queer romance or, cast of friends you could make, there was significant pushback. And I'm sure there are different experiences here. My experience is that pink washing is just a corporate thing to like sell stuff during Pride Month. I've never experienced or seen pink washing in like creating a character or an experience in a game. In my experience, that always comes from actual queer developers behind the scenes and the people who are supporting them, pushing really hard for it against sometimes significant backlash. And there's so much effort that has to go into creating a queer experience in a game. Are we going to get consultants? How are we going to handle the localization of different pronouns? What about countries with censorship laws? What about, how are the social media people going to be protected against the worst subset of gamers who will be really nasty about this? What do we do if someone gets doxxed? Like, there's so many things to consider. And so it's kind of heartbreaking when something goes out and players are like, oh, this was just shoehorned in for the views or whatever. It's like, no, none of it was in my experience. But yeah, so much progress.
Yeah. It's a progress. Yes, Elliot. Yes.
Sorry, just to add to that, I think that's one of the reasons why it's so helpful and important to have diverse, marginalized people in positions of management, because a lot of people in game dev haven't actually dealt with these things. They haven't thought about wait, is my team going to get harassed because we put a queer person in this game? And I've, at least in my experience, it always seems to turn out better when, at the very least, the bosses are aware of these risks. If not,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's so true. Okay, thank you so much to all of you once again for sitting with me today and chatting and sharing so freely. I really, really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it as well. And also for the work you do as a player and as a queer person. Can't tell you how much it means to see myself in stories on screen. It makes the world of difference. Get emotional about it, but I'm not going to. It means the world though. Thank you all so much for what you do and for sharing today. It's been wonderful, and hopefully we will work together again. I hope that this has been a good experience for you too, and you'd be happy to come back? ? But yes, thank you all so much. I'm gonna wrap up the live now. Thank you to everyone who sent in questions. They were wonderful. Thank you to everyone involved. Okay, I think we're gonna wrap it up. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So nice seeing you all in the audience. I guess I don't know how many of you there were, but hi.
Thank you. Okay, cool.